Hello there, welcome to Planet America. Here in the Situation Room, I'm John Barron.
I'm Licciardello, and yes, we've got another situation.
Breaking news out of the CDC where top officials are resigning en masse.
But CDC Director Susan Menarez has been ousted from her position just weeks into the job.
Vaccine policy is changing quickly under HHS Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr.
Science will be contaminated by ideology.
Chaos and confusion at the Centers for Disease Control while Health Secretary Bobby Kennedy continues to stoke fears about vaccines.
And the plot thickens following the FBI raids on John Bolton. Might he have some questions to answer? But first,
global trade has been thrown into turmoil again.
Just moments ago, actually, a federal appeals court ruled most of President Trump's tariffs are illegal. The court is saying the president exceeded his authority in imposing those levies.
The majority found the power to impose taxes such as tariffs is vested exclusively in the legislative branch. It's up to the US Congress, not the president. President Trump's reaction was about what you'd expect.
If allowed to stand, this decision would literally destroy the United States of America.
Literally. But he also had this piece of reassurance.
All tariffs are still in effect.
And they are, at least until mid-October, to give Trump time to appeal against this defeat to the US Supreme Court. The lawyer who argued this case says it is clear Trump exceeded his powers.
The court overwhelmingly today, in a 7-4 decision, rejected President Trump's notion that he can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants, and it said, no, the Constitution imposes limits. And one really important limit, Mr. President, is you're not allowed to tariff on your own.
And the stakes for Trump are high, with his tariffs expected to bring in $500 billion or more a year in revenue from American taxpayers to the US government.
at least that's what Treasurer Scott Bessent tells us. But to be clear, this ruling does not apply to all of Trump's tariffs. It's mostly about the so-called Liberation Day tariffs that Trump imposed back in April on all the countries of the world, as well as Trump's tariffs this year on Mexico, Canada and China. So what that means is Trump's sector-specific tariffs on like silicon chips, steel, aluminium, they'll be unaffected. Trump's tariffs on China from his first term, they'll also be unaffected. And his new tariffs on online sales worth $800 or less, they'll be unaffected as well. Basically, if this ruling holds up, Trump's tariffs will go from affecting 69% of America's imports to 16% of America's imports. The ruling also leaves Trump the chance to impose more tariffs if he likes, like more sector-specific tariffs, for instance, or maybe completely new tariffs using the 1974 Trade Act instead, although those tariffs are capped at 15% and only for 150 days, so Trump might not like them very much. In other words, I doubt this is going to destroy America, even if the tariffs were as important as Trump suggests. Trump also accused the court of being highly partisan, but if we look at the numbers, the 7 members of the majority were made up by 6 Democratic-appointed judges and 1 Republican-appointed judge, whereas the minority was made up of 2 Democratic-appointed judges and 2 Republican-appointed ones. So you make up your own mind. One thing's for sure, though, and that is, well, nothing's for sure, John. The uncertainty in the trade world seems set to continue for a few more months yet. In fact, the Supreme Court's probably going to drag this one out till next year. So the tariff question will not be resolved for a while.
Yeah, it's starting to look that way. Now to the ructions at the US Centers for Disease Control. Following the dismissal of CDC Director Susan Menarez last week, only a month after she was confirmed to the position by the United States Senate. Menarez was ousted by the Health and Human Services Secretary Robert Kennedy.
I will confirm that we let go Susan Menarez yesterday. I'm not going to talk about personnel issues, but, you know, the CDC is an agency that is very troubled for a very long time.
Very troubled by Kennedy and his unscientific vaccine skepticism and the axe that he's wielded through America's public health system. In April, mass layoffs began affecting more than 10,000 health department staff and almost 2,500 CDC employees. That's 1 in 5 of their total workforce. The CDC's mission is to protect America from health, safety and security threats by conducting critical science and providing health information. But the concern of Menarez and several other senior CDC officials who resigned in protest last week is that under Secretary Kennedy, critical science is being corrupted. In June, Kennedy fired 17 members of the Expert Advisory Committee on Immunisation Practices, which makes recommendations for how vaccines are used, and he replaced them with 8 members, several of whom have expressed outright vaccine scepticism. Lawyers for Menares claim that Kennedy forced her out when she, quote, refused to rubber stamp unscientific, reckless directives and fire dedicated health experts. Secretary Kennedy has been called to appear before the powerful Senate Finance Committee this week. The White House so far standing by him. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt explaining it this way.
The President and Secretary Kennedy are committed to restoring trust and transparency and credibility to the CDC by ensuring their leadership and their decisions are more public-facing, more accountable, strengthening our public health system, and restoring it to its core mission of protecting Americans from communicable diseases.
That's all well and good, but despite that, last week Kennedy announced the emergency use authorisations for COVID vaccine has been rescinded, a move that Menares opposed, and that will make it harder for Americans under the age of 65 or without pre-existing conditions to get vaccines, requiring at least one visit to see a doctor first. COVID shots can also cost $200 or more if you don't have insurance, and experts warn that this is a disaster waiting to happen and puts the entire American population at risk for severe COVID disease.
Yeah, just to be clear, there are a hell of a lot of pre-existing conditions that do still qualify you for a COVID shot. You could be over 65 or non-white or overweight or physically inactive or have been a smoker or be depressed or have diabetes or asthma or be disabled or have a heart condition or be pregnant or have cancer, and the list goes on if I had a little bit more breath. But as you say, John, it's the doctor's visit and bureaucratic hurdles that are the biggest issue. They get in the way, and it's not clear why you'd want to make it harder for people to get the vaccine if they want it. This is just one of many issues that Menares had with RFK. I expect this issue featured prominently in her disgruntlement as well.
I think that another important thing to ask the secretary is, has he been ever briefed by a CDC expert on anything, specifically measles, COVID-19, flu? I think that people should ask him that in that hearing.
What would the answer to that be?
So the answer is no. So no one from my center has ever briefed him on any of those topics. Yeah, he's getting information from somewhere, but that information is not coming from CDC experts.
Having a huge arsenal of experts at your disposal and then completely ignoring them sounds like poor leadership, but I think I know how RFK would respond.
We need to stop trusting the experts, right? We were told at the beginning of COVID, don't look at any data yourself. Don't do any investigation yourself. Just trust the experts. And trusting the experts is not a feature of science. It's not a feature of democracy. It's a feature of religion, and it's a feature of totalitarianism.
Of course, experts should be questioned, and the best people to question them are other informed individuals, not every rando on the internet. Because the problem with RFK is that he does trust people. He just trusts the wrong people. Take this from last week's cabinet meeting.
The autism is such a tremendous horror show, what's happening in our country and some other countries, but mostly our country. How are you doing on that?
We are doing very well. We will have announcements as promised in September. We're finding certain interventions now that are clearly, almost certainly causing autism. And we're going to be able to address those in September.
The medical community are dreading what RFK comes up with as his cause for autism, because the guy he's put in charge of his research is David Geyer, a man who has published numerous articles trying to tie mercury in vaccines to autism. Federal judges have already rejected Geyer's research as being too unreliable to stand up in court. But that is who RFK trusts. He trusts people who tell him what he wants to hear. That's not science either. That's crankery. And that's what's making the scientists at the CDC despair. I'm not sure this news is going to make them any happier either. Trump has just chosen as his acting director of the CDC to replace Menares a guy called Jim O'Neill, who has no medical or scientific background at all. And he comes with his own set of interesting views, like, for instance, that drugs should be allowed on the market before we even know if they work. He said, let people start using them at their own risk. let's prove efficacy after they've been legalised. Well, I guess at least he would let people get the COVID vaccine if they want, John.
Sounds like it. For more on all of this, I spoke to Kathleen Sebelius. She served for 5 years in the post that Bobby Kennedy currently holds, Secretary of Health and Human Services. For her, that was during the Obama administration. She is also a former Democratic governor of the state of Kansas. Governor, welcome to Planet America. What impact do you expect the departure of senior CDC staff to have on both the centres and public health in America?
Well, I'm terribly worried, John, that what we're seeing in the United States is really a dismantling of an incredibly important leadership role on public health, both in this country and across the globe. And the departure of the incredibly talented leaders at CDC are just the next blow along the way. So the budget for that critical public health agency has already been cut by about 40%. Staff members have been fired and let go across the board. We have withdrawn our leadership role in World Health by dismantling USAID, by threatening to leave the World Health Organization, and the CDC led the delegation of the United States members to the World Health Organization. We're not going to participate in world discussions on vaccines. We've slashed the budgets for vaccine research and development. So we now have a real collapse of the whole leadership team at the Centers for Disease Control. And I think it is threatening the welfare of the health of American children, American families, but also the health of people across the globe.
Governor, these newly appointed members of the Vaccine Advisory Panel to the centres are causing a lot of concern within the centres, reportedly. Are we really in a situation where essentially unqualified people with fringe, unscientific views are going to limit access to vaccines?
Well, your description of some of the members of the advisory panel also, I think, applied directly to the current Secretary of Health and Human Services, a person who has no scientific background, has no medical degree, has lots of frequently disputed fringe theories, which he cites on a regular basis. And he has handpicked a group of people, many of whom are his devotees, to be on the Vaccine Advisory Commission. And it's a very dangerous combination where rather than choosing people for their scientific expertise, for their vaccine knowledge, for their research knowledge, for their peer-reviewed studies and ideas and opinions, he fired 17 people and chose a handful of folks, many of whom have really crackpot theories, but they will be in the key position of making recommendations on what vaccines will be available, what vaccines should be researched, what guidance parents should follow if they want to keep their children safe and secure. And that's a very, very dangerous place for public health in America.
Governor, Secretary Kennedy is on the record as saying that the centres have been corrupted by the big pharmaceutical companies, essentially saying that untested, unsafe vaccines are being forced onto the American people as a result. What do you say to that?
Well, I just say it is a blatant lie. The members of the vaccine committee who were fired by Secretary Kennedy abruptly, not with any transparency, not with any kind of due process, just all of them had to go. Were all vetted carefully. We're all in a public process where they had to submit information about their background, their interests, and also their conflicts of interest, about their expertise. There was an opportunity to look at each and every one of them. They serve staggered terms specifically so they're not chosen en masse. And I think the CDC is one of the agencies with very little, at least in the past, very, very little political interference. There are very few political appointees, meaning people who are chosen by the president or confirmed by the Senate. Most of the employees, the vast majority, are scientists, our researchers, our dedicated health professionals, our epidemiologists, and that has given the CDC status as a very trusted institution across this country. What's happening right now is a corruption of that trust, and I think the accusation somehow that the existing staff, that the existing members of the vaccine committee who served as volunteers are corrupt or somehow overly influenced by pharma is just a really unfortunate lie. It's blatantly untrue, and it's dangerous. It will hurt people. It could potentially kill people who will choose to follow Senator Kennedy's advice, not to get their children vaccinated, not to take advantage of one of the great breakthroughs of modern medicine, which is vaccines that have basically eliminated some very common diseases, and will be set back 50 years.
Governor, Secretary Kennedy is due to appear before the Senate Finance Committee to be questioned about the CDC this week. What questions would you like to see the senators ask him?
Well, I start with a great deal of disappointment in the United States senators who voted to confirm Bobby Kennedy to this very critical position of Secretary of Health and Human Services. He made his views on vaccines very clear throughout his most recent career. He basically lied to the committee about some of those views, saying he did not intend to interfere with science. He did not intend to interfere with a vaccine protocol. When it was clear, given his very keen interest in suing pharmaceutical companies, in making personal gains from those lawsuits, in asserting facts that just absolutely were unproven and untrue, including an alleged link between some drugs and autism, suggesting that the mRNA vaccines are the most dangerous vaccines ever created. Those kinds of accusations with no scientific fact are, again, very dangerous. So I would hope that particularly members of the Senate Finance Committee who voted to confirm this secretary will go back to that hearing, will re-ask the questions that were asked that he gave false information about, will question his credibility, his capability, will question his leadership and his views on science that he continues to put forward. And then we'll turn to the president and urge the president of the United States to fire the secretary.
Governor Sebelius, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Planet America.
Sure. Good to talk to you.
And while we're gas-bagging about RFK Jr., you might remember the Health and Human Services Secretary promising that he'd clamp down on pharmaceutical TV ads. But not as straightforward as he thought it would be, as Melina Wicks explains in the briefing room.
We all know those infamous American pharma ads, where they tell you to ask your doctor about a drug before rattling through a list of alarming side effects.
Ketoacidosis is a serious side effect that may lead to death. A rare, life-threatening bacterial infection in the skin of the perineum could occur.
That music was so jaunty, I didn't even notice them saying their product could kill me. Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. wants to ban pharmaceutical ads. And in a refreshing twist, he's got doctors on his side.
Only 2 countries in the world, the US and New Zealand, allow this practice. Every other nation agrees with the American Medical Association, which has called direct-to-consumer drug advertising both misleading and dangerous, and has called for the practice to be halted.
These pharma ads are big business. Manufacturers spend more than $1 billion a month on them. And prescription drug brands account for 1/4 of ad minutes during the evening news. So you can learn about everything that's wrong in the world, and then learn about what you can take to make you feel better. Critics of these ads say they encourage overprescribing and steer people towards more expensive brand-name drugs. And research has shown the majority of top advertised drugs offer little medical benefit compared to existing treatments. But while Americans spend more on prescription drugs than other countries, there's not a lot of evidence they use prescription drugs more. Defenders of the ads say they prompt people to see their doctors for untreated conditions, which is a good thing. And there's evidence that drug ads increase sales for the advertised brand name drug but also its generic competitors. But whether you think pharma ads are good or bad, the reality is the government almost certainly can't ban them because of the First Amendment, which guarantees the right to free speech, including in ads. That's why, despite rhetoric like this on the campaign trail,
one of the things I'm going to advise Donald Trump to do in order to correct the chronic disease epidemic is to ban pharmaceutical advertising on TV.
RFK Jr. is now backtracking to a more modest pair of proposals, and they don't sound nearly as good under dramatic piano music. One would require ads to have longer warnings about side effects, making them more expensive to run. The other would prevent drug companies from deducting advertising costs as business expenses for tax purposes. Not nothing, but a long way short of a ban. And that's assuming they can even go that far. If the courts get involved, well, let's just say the regulations could see
a serious side effect that may lead to death.
Donald Trump's former national security advisor and friend of the show, John Bolton, had his home and office raided by the FBI last week.
One source says that agents are looking for potential classified documents they believe are in his possession. FBI Director Kash Patel tweeting earlier this morning, "No one is above the law. FBI agents on mission."
To some, that looked like a possible case of payback for Bolton's scathing criticisms of Trump since leaving the administration, and possibly a square-up after the FBI raided Trump's home at Mar-a-Lago 3 years ago, also looking for illegally retained documents, although President Trump says it had nothing to do with him.
Have you been briefed on the FBI raid of John Bolton's home?
No, I don't know about it. I saw it on television this morning. I'm not a fan of John Bolton. He's a real... sort of a lowlife. I don't want to know about it. Just you have to do what you have to do. I don't want to know about it. It's not necessary. I could know about it. I could be the one starting it. I'm actually the chief law enforcement officer, but I feel that it's better this way.
Now, that might come as a little bit of a surprise to Pam Bondi, who, as Attorney General of the United States, is actually the chief law enforcement officer, but never mind. The raids came on the orders of FBI Chief Kash Patel and reportedly relate to concerns that Bolton sent highly sensitive, classified documents to his family from a private email server while working in the White House. The FBI opened their probe into Bolton while Trump was still president in 2020, but reportedly began to pick up momentum during the Biden administration. And intelligence officials thought that Bolton had mishandled classified information. And they knew that because his emails and other sensitive information found its way into the hands of an adversarial country's spy service. So, in simple terms, the suspicion is that Bolton sent classified emails to his family members so he could then use them to write his memoirs, but a foreign spy agency somehow got a hold of them as well. So, was he hacked? Very possibly. We also know that Iran has been plotting to kill John Bolton, so maybe they were keeping track of his communications. Or did he share them with somebody else? Or, indeed, is he, as Trump suggests, in fact, a traitor? That would seem to be extremely unlikely for somebody with his decades of high-level service, but clearly Trump is enjoying turning up the heat.
I was never a fan of his. I thought he was stupid. I thought he was, a guy that only wanted to go into war. He liked killing people. I thought he was essentially a bad guy, but I'm not involved in that. No, you'd have to ask Pam Bondi about that.
A stupid bad guy who he made national security advisor.
Look, if this report from the New York Times is accurate, and that's an if, then Trump has been slandered a bit here because it would suggest that the raid was legit, that the FBI wanted to see if Bolton possessed materials at home that matched or corroborated the classified material in question, as that would indicate that the emails they found from the Foreign Spy Service were genuine. After all, those emails could be fakes, They could have even been written by that Foreign Spy Service to be detected, especially given the emails include information that Bolton didn't even use in his book. So there are a lot of questions there. Primarily, did they find anything? And the answer is, we don't know. There's been precious little leaking in this story, to be honest, apart from that one New York Times article. A lot of question marks out there. So look, I'd reserve judgment for now and just see what pans out. It's a bit...
Very prudent of you, very prudent indeed. The state of Missouri has become the latest to join in this redistricting war, with the state's Republican Governor, Mike Kehoe, announcing a special session of the General Assembly for this week to, quote, take action on congressional redistricting and initiative petition reform to ensure our districts and Constitution truly put Missouri values first. By which he means another gerrymander, to selectively redraw the congressional districts with an eye on Missouri's 5th district, making it easier for a Republican to win what is currently a Democratic seat. And this follows, of course, moves by Republicans in Texas to gerrymander as many as 5 House seats in their favour, and counter moves by Democrats in California to gerrymander 5 back right away there. Currently, 6 of Missouri's 8 US representatives are Republicans. Kehoe and President Trump want 7. And Trump immediately truthed his approval of what he's described as
a new, much fairer and much improved congressional map that will give the incredible people of Missouri the tremendous opportunity to elect an additional MAGA Republican in the 2026 midterm elections.
There is a lot of this kind of thing at the moment, John. J.D. Vance only just met up with 55 Indiana state Republicans to push them to redistrict as well, while Trump met up with the Indiana House Speaker and Senate President to twist their arms as well. There are potentially 2 Democratic seats in Indiana that could be gerrymandered away. Meanwhile, over in honest, innocent Utah, the opposite is happening. A Utah judge just rules the Republicans have to stick to their citizen-backed initiative to draw electoral lines fairly. The Independent Commission followed traditional redistricting criteria, and it came up with 3 different potential maps, all of which yielded at least 1 solidly blue Democratic district. The Republicans did not like that, but I'm sure they'll find another gerrymandered seat somewhere in some other red state next week, probably. I guess every seat counts. Meanwhile, a high-profile critic has emerged of Gavin Newsom's plan to gerrymander California. Former California Governor Arnie Schwarzenegger, aka the Governator, says, "We are not going to go into a stinking contest with a skunk." But can Arnie use his celebrity power to stop America's gerrymandering arms race?
Arnie has remastered his iconic films to help defeat gerrymandering. Total redraw.
What do you think these gerrymandered districts look like?
Two-headed monsters?
Nonpartisan cop.
No. Monsters.
And the Predeterminator 2. Election Day. All your Arnie favorites reimagined.
And that is all for another fun-filled trip to Planet America. We will be back, though, on ABC TV at the same time next week, 9:35 p.m-ish, or anytime you like on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook.
And you can see Play America's Weekend Edition on ABC News at 8 p.m. Eastern on Friday night, or in those other places as well. See ya. Bye-bye.